Welcome to the IonaHoops.com podcast with your host, Guy Flatico.
It's season 2, episode 28 of the IonaHoops.com podcast, and we're going to get analytical in this episode. I hope most of you understand the concepts of efficiency ratings and whatnot, because you've heard about me go on and on about them for quite a bit. But in case you don't, or with the hope that you'd like to learn more, and if you don't, this is the wrong episode for you. We're going to welcome Erik Haslam to our program this episode. You guys all know who Ken Pomeroy is. Well, Erik's got his own analytics system known as Haslametrics, and you guys have heard me talk about Haslametrics on this podcast before. Haslametrics does have some interesting differences from Ken Pom, and we're going to get into all of that with Erik later in the program. We're going to get into some IoTas right now, though. IoTas. Well, last week's impromptu Zoom call with Rick Pitino took an interesting turn from its intent, but the information shared was still quite valuable. We're going to dive into the full recruiting class in upcoming episodes for sure. I'm going to have lots of great guests to help cover that. But I wanted to circle back and share more specifically what we know about the non-conference schedule. We'll be opening things up on November 7th, which is probably the opening day for all of college basketball, at home against UPenn. At the time of the Zoom call, Pitino just referred to the opponent as, quote-unquote, a top Ivy League opponent. But it was reported this week that Penn is indeed the team that will be visiting. We'll be at Hofstra on November 11th to complete the 3-game series with the Pride that began with a mascot coin flip during COVID, if you remember. A week later, November 18th, we'll be playing at Mohegan Sun, which is one of my favorite places to be, by the way, and my vote for a Mac Turney site down the line. But that's a topic for another pod. More on who will be playing in that in a bit. Well, actually, we'll talk about it right now. During the Zoom call, Pitino said we'd be playing, quote-unquote, an NCAA tourney team from the Atlantic 10. Now, by the book, that means Richmond or Davidson, right? But we all know Rick Pitino often misspeaks, which to me means that he may have misremembered which 8 teams actually were in the NCAA tournament and which ones actually were in the NIT, because there were quite a few bubble teams in the A10, as we know. So there's other candidates like Dayton, VCU, or St. Bonaventure, the latter of which had been rumored for a time in social media as a game potentially happening for the Gales. And if you want to get technical, he technically could have also meant Loyola Chicago, which made the tournament last year as a member of the Missouri Valley, but is beginning its time in the Atlantic 10 next year. So again, we're just going to have to wait and see on that. Anyway, we'll then hit the MAC weekend of games from November 30th to December 4th, and then we're going to return to non-conference play with a home game against St. Louis on December 6th, speaking of the A10. Then on December 11th, we'll be back at Barclays to take on, quote-unquote, another NCAA team, per Pitino. No opponent mentioned, but more on that in 1 second. Then it's time to hit the road, and a long way from home. The Gales start the swing December 18th at The Pit against New Mexico, and some guy named Richard Pitino. Oh, by the way, New Mexico will return the game to New Rochelle in 2023-24, and we already also know our return game at Harvard will be pushed until that year as well. So look at that. The non-conference schedule for the season after next is already starting to take shape. And then the Gales will head to Hawaii December 22nd to 25th. Get ready to be watching some hoops during holiday feasting again like we did this past year. They'll be in the Diamond Head Classic, which is a nice field including GW, Hawaii, Pepperdine, Seattle, SMU, Utah State, and Washington State. It's a fun field because those are all decent teams. None of them are terrible in any stretch of imagination. So there's a nice test there. But that's said, there's nobody so good here that it's like, well, we're not going to win this tournament. Iona can win this tournament if everything falls into place. So, and there's no bad games to be had here. So it'll be fun. A couple of things to note. Iona and Seton Hall are still trying to work things out for a game at the Garden, though that could shift to another New York area venue. Pitino mentioned Barclays or even UBS Center for this one. We'll have to wait and see. So totaling all that up, counting Seton Hall, that's 10 out of our possible 11 non-conference games already, almost signed, sealed, and delivered, almost. So there's one more to add. And again, early guess would be whatever venue of Barclays and UBS we do not end up using for Seton Hall. That's, again, my guess. As it does not feel like that game's going to be at the Garden. But who knows? Still time. Still, though, what was the last time our non-conference slate was this far along in April? Great work by the staff getting things ironed out quickly. Allows for more focus on future recruiting classes and, of course, current player development. Stay tuned for more schedule updates.
Iona. Iotas.
I mentioned Ken Pom in the opening. Let's take a look at some final numbers for this season. Iona Gales finished at number 89 in Ken Pom. Oh, by the way, St. Peter's wraps things up at number 102. So much for analytics. Anyway, the offensive and defensive efficiency numbers we finished at surprised me a little bit from where I thought we would be. The Gales offense finished 80th in offensive efficiency, which is a number I just did not expect us to achieve this year. And it's also a bit surprising when you consider the flaws the offense had shown this year over the course of the season. I mean, you guys know we weren't great from the line or from three, ranking number 265 and number 202, respectively, in those categories. But we also were not good in percentage of steals allowed. Yes, that's a number. 259th nationally, actually. I mean, that's awful. But we did do some things exceptionally well on offense. We were 13th in assists per field goals made, 29th in free throw attempts per field goal attempts, and 61st in offensive rebound percentage. So despite its shortcomings, this was a top 80 offense in the country. But how about that defense? Well, I'd have to dig back in time some. But for a stretch when things were going well in New Rochelle, our defense was the reason why, and our efficiency rating was in the 60s. This is kind of what I expected, as I predicted before the year we'd have a top 75 defense. But we ended at just 105 after some flat-out defensive collapses through February and March. I mean, think about this. Iona was 31st in three-point percentage allowed, 68th in two-point percentage allowed, and we were 8th nationally in blocked shots percentage. Those are great numbers for the season. So how the heck did we drop so far? How about being 246th in offensive rebound percentage allowed and being 266th in free throw attempts per field goal attempts allowed? That means we gave up way too many offensive boards and we fouled way too much. Wow, did those numbers really pull us down when you think about it? We're going to end this with one more interesting number, though. Iona's home court advantage was calculated to be just 2.4 points per game, which was only 315th nationally. That's amazing when you consider we ran the table at home. And lastly, thanks to St. Peter's great postseason run, the MAC finished at 16th best conference in the country. That's the league's highest Ken Pom since 2013, when the league finished 14th.
Iotas.
Let's stay with Ken Pom for another iota and look at some individual numbers for the Gals. We'll look at numbers that were top 200 individually nationally here. And we're going to start with who else but Nelly, who was 43rd in free throw attempts per field goal attempts, 55th in offensive rebound percentage, 80th in block percentage, and 109th in fouls drawn per 40 minutes. Dylan Van Eyck also features prominently in these stats. How about 16th nationally in two-point field goal percentage, 129th in overall offensive rating, 167th in assists per team field goals made, and 197th in three-point percentage. Just a couple other Gals and a couple other final spots. Tyson Jolly finished 158th in percentage of minutes played. Slaz finished 172nd in free throw percentage. And how about this? Barrick finished 191st in two-point field goal percentage. So some interesting individual analytics there. And now let me give you some insight into Haslametrics before we welcome our guest. Last century, computer rating systems became an integral part of college hoops, with RPI becoming the NCAA's primary selection tool, and other systems like Jeff Sager, remember him, providing other levels of data to support the committee's selections. Once we crossed into the 2000s, though, other computer models started to appear, and these were a bit different as they were developed not only to rate and rank teams, but also provide a predictive analytical profile for teams as well. Of course, Ken Pom is the most prominent of these, and even with the advent of the net rankings, many college basketball talking heads still prefer the data generated by Ken Pom over the net and the now defunct RPI. What the heck is Ken Pom? Well, it's an advanced statistical system created by Ken Pomeroy designed for predictive analytics. Ken Pom measures teams based on efficiency to not only paint a picture of how a basketball team compares to the rest of the nation, but it's also a fairly predictive formula that can chart where a team might be heading in terms of its performance as well. Want proof of its impact? When Hoops starts up again next November, check out the point spreads Vegas generates for those games. And then check out the predictive outcome for those games in Ken Palm. Those numbers are going to be strikingly similar, and that usually stays true throughout most of the season. Vegas puts its faith in some of these analytics, and of course, they have a lot more at stake than you and I do. So some people might feel like all of these data and predictive and analytics and such is just over their head. It's just a bunch of numbers. What does it all really mean? And, games are played on the court, all that nonsense. But it's really not that complicated. Once you understand the basic definitions, what it measures, and also you would understand that teams and coaches use these analytics as well to even figure out their own team sometimes. So let's take a closer look at what some of these numbers are. Let's start with the adjusted efficiency margin, which is basically the Ken Palm ranking. This is how he determines the overall rankings of teams. In other words, your overall efficiency. And that takes your offensive efficiency minus your defensive efficiency to determine how much a team would outscore the average Division I program by. So I mentioned adjusted offensive efficiency. This is the amount of points a team scores per 100 possessions, and likewise, defensive efficiency is the amount of points a team allows per 100 possessions. Of course, there are so many other ratings that get factored in when these full overall efficient offensive defensive efficiency categories are generated. Tempo is considered, and that's roughly based on the number of possessions a team plays in a game on average. Luck is a factor. Yes, you can actually put a value on luck. It's a measure of a team's actual record compared to what the system thinks your record should be. Then, of course, the big one, and one that you probably all could guess, your strength of schedule is factored in, as it's obviously more impressive to score, 80 against Kansas than it is to score 80 against Canisius. And likewise, it's more impressive to hold Kansas to 60 than it is to hold Canisius to 60. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to pull you in as our example there. But that's Ken Palm, and that's a rough overview of what those analytics mean. Of course, there's so much more that goes into it than that. But that's some basics there just to get you level set it in case you are so new to all of this and you have no idea what I'm talking about. Hopefully that helps a little bit. So as wonderful and fun as it is to dig into Ken Palm numbers, there are other approaches out there to actually analyzing the data from basketball. And there's other factors that you can actually consider. And there's other, again, systems that have been developed with some alterations to what Ken Palm's system has. And we're going to explore one of those today. There's a lesser-known option for predictive analytics called Haslametrics. Again, you guys have heard me talk about this on the site before. And those of you who check out Ken Palm every November, for example, will know that those initial rankings that they have in November, like on November 8th, when you open up Ken Palm, you'll see everybody's rated already. That's usually based on what they did last year in terms of percentage of the points they have coming back and some things like that. I mean, there's a lot of analytics to go into that opening prediction and projection from Ken Palm. Haslametrics does away with that. They start you fresh each year. So, and that's one thing I actually think is a benefit, because if you're not projected to do well to start a season, you're already in the hole. So, I mean, in a team like, for instance, St. Peter's is going to losing most of its roster. They're going to end up being projected in Ken Palm to do very poorly, but they might end up being okay next year. You never know. But they're starting in a hole in Ken Palm, and that's the one problem I have with that. So I like the fresh start that Haslametrics provides. Last year's not a consideration; it's what you're doing this year. So those of you, again, like I said, so when you open up Haslametrics next November 1st, everybody's going to be at 0. It's built on blind resumes, meaning everyone starts at 0. And it does not include any kind of preseason rankings. So Haslametrics does have all those other efficiency ratings that Ken Palm has, but also generates data for what basketball fans would consider eye test type judgments. And yes, there is such a thing. You can actually put a number on some of that. So what do I mean by that? How about a team that has momentum? St. Peter's, anyone? And for that matter, Iona, if we want to talk about March. Something like that. He's got a value for that. All of that's factored into overall ratings. How about how a team performs on the road versus how it performs at home? Now, yeah, we do that's factored into Ken Palm, but they do it a little differently. It's just some teams, and again, I'm referring to like Iona, was much, much weaker on the road than it was at home or at a neutral site. And then how about how consistent a team is according to its analytics? So you've got a number that you're rated, in terms of, do you skew from that number and perform way over your head one game and then go out the next game and perform way under your head? Or are you pretty even keel? So those are kind of numbers that are factoring as well. It's interesting to see because, you think about how erratic college sports are, and yet, that there are teams that are not as erratic as you would think. And we're going to talk about one of them in a little bit. What else we have? Oh, I have another one that I really like. How about this? It's when a game goes analytically final, and that's a fun thing that Erik Haslam will tweet often when he's watching a game. That means that any game that's kind of decided, it's over. I mean, I'll give you an example. Kansas is up 25 over Canisius with 5 minutes ago. That game's over. So what the system does is discards those data after that point, because Kansas is going to empty its bench. Its weakest players are going out. Canisius might be, pressing a lot more or putting in their own bench guys. So all of those stats, and what if Canisius' bench guys all of a sudden, they make, 7 or 8 shots to close the game, all that data is gone. It doesn't count because the game is analytically final and the concept of the game and the competitive spirit of it's changing. So Haslametrics only captures until a game is determined to be analytically final. So that's kind of a cool one, and it makes things, to me, even more accurate than some other systems out there when you win and beating somebody by 40 points and the last 10 minutes are garbage time. So something else. That's pretty cool if you think about it when you look at it that way. So now that you've got a better feel for predictive analytics on the whole, as well as a nice little introduction to Haslametrics, let's meet the man. Oh my goodness. Let's meet the man behind them, Erik Haslam. So a lesson so many of us learn by early adulthood is to surround yourself with people smarter than you. And this is even true of the IKnowHoops.com podcast, as my listeners are sick of hearing me talk about analytics. So I've decided to bring in somebody far smarter than me to actually talk about them and explain them to everyone, including myself. Erik Haslam from Haslametrics joins us now in the quiet of our college hoops off season. Erik, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. And by the way, I don't know if I'm smarter than you. I might have fooled you. I just have that engineering degree, and that's just kind of makes people think I'm a smart guy. But I don't know. I may not be the smartest guy here. Just saying.
I don't know. I fake it really well, but yeah, I'll defer to you on all this. So earlier in this episode, I did give everybody a 30,000 foot view of how advanced statistics and predictive analytics have become part of the game that we love over the last 30 or 40 years or so, starting with tools like Sagarin and RPI and evolving to KenPom and net ratings. I've also gone into some other lesser known analytic tools that, in my view, take what KenPom started into unique directions with, of course, a focus on Haslametrics. So I want you to take a couple minutes for everybody here and describe how your passion for college hoops analytics started and how Haslametrics was eventually born from all of that.
Yeah. So, I went to college in Wisconsin, and it even goes beyond before that. And I think it started in 1990 when I really just kind of loved March Madness, fell in love with March Madness, especially that Loyola Marymount team after Hank Gathers tragically passed away. You had Bo Kimball and you had Fryer and Peabody and Per Steamer. Great. I just love that team. I love that tournament. I just fell in love with March Madness. And then in the early 90s, the internet wasn't around yet. So one of the things that I really loved to do was, I hit the newsstand first thing early on Monday morning, because the USA Today had this big summary of team capsules that you could get a summary of every single team that was in the tournament. You remember back then, there weren't like 10 stations. I think you just basically had ESPN and maybe ESPN2, and that was your primary means of watching games. Mm-hmm. But I graduated from college in 96 in electrical engineering with a computer option. So that means I took a big chunk of computer science classes. So I had that background working for me. And as time went along and the internet, got older and older, statistics were, in our fingertips. We could get to things very easily. And after a while, and I started messing around, and I would say somewhere around 2007, 2008, it started with, the stepping stones to get there, like access databases and Excel spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. And, I read about how to, look at things on a per possession basis and You hear about Dean Oliver's 4 factors, where he used these 4 categories to predict how the outcome of gaming and come up with your performance rankings. And I kind of was recreating the wheel. And I kind of said to myself at one point, I don't want to recreate the wheel. I want to do it a way that I would do it. I kind of wanted a blank slate and said, if I were doing this from scratch, how would I do it? And that's when Haslametrics was kind of formed in like 2013 or 2014. And I just kind of said, everything is based on score on the scoreboard that determines wins and losses. So I really want to base a system on that very thing. So my system is very much based on shot location, shot scenarios, tendency for success from those different locations. I kind of threw out the 4 factor stuff that other people had used. And that's kind of where it just kind of went from there. And, with the background, I was able to roll out a website, had my performance rankings, said, I can do the automated team summaries and game previews, things like that, added in some bracketology. You can see any outcome of any game on any court, things like that. And over time, it's just been brick by brick. And I just kind of built a castle over the last 7-8 years or so.
Well, I definitely shared some Haslametrics data with Iona fans over the season, as well as Ken Palm numbers. And no doubt the typical fan listening right now is more familiar with the latter. Can you describe for everybody what some of the primary differences in approach that Haslametrics takes compared with Ken Palm?
And there's somewhat, as I can kind of answer that a little bit, because I don't know exactly what goes into Ken Palm stuff. I can tell you, like, a lot of the stuff behind the scenes for my stuff really depends on transitive comparisons. And so I always look at it this way: if Wisconsin plays Michigan and Illinois plays Michigan, you can use Michigan as kind of a measuring stick to determine a comparison between Wisconsin and Illinois, both on the offensive end and the defensive end. And what I like to do is I break things down. If you're looking at shot location, I can go to my play-by-play logs and get really rich data from that. And it can tell me if it's going to be a 3-point shot, it's going to be labeled a 3-point shot. If it's going to be a shot, what I call near proximity, it's going to be called a dunk or a tip in or a layup or something like that. Whereas everything else will just be called a jump shot. And that'll be your mid-range too. So I was able to divide things up that way. And then I kind of thought to myself, I want to be able to identify specific situations where field goal percentage might be higher than expected. And I came up with 2, one of them being second chance putbacks, meaning you get a rebound underneath the hoop and you put it back up and score inside of 5 seconds. That's your second chance points. And then quick points off of steals. So basically, if you get a steal and you get a conversion less than 10 seconds after the steal, that's another situation where the field goal percentage is going to be much higher than, say, your just regular half court set defense. So what I ended up doing is I kind of said, based on all where these teams like to shoot, how often they acquire these scenarios, and then how successful they are at converting for all of these, you kind of have a system set up that's really based on shot location. And I don't think that's what Pomeroy does. I think Pomeroy does more of the 4 factors like Dean Oliver did. But that's kind of what I want to do. I kind of wanted to do things a little bit differently than what anybody else had done before. And so that's why I did it that way. And then anybody who follows my stuff has heard me say on Twitter, I've talked about #analytically final. And I get, a lot of people love that for whatever reason. And the reason I did it is I just kind of wanted to eliminate garbage time stats.
Yeah.
So when a game goes analytically final, and this was based on a premise by Bill James. Bill James created something like this. I tweaked it to something I thought was a little bit better. But it basically says at one point in the game, one team is going to be up a certain amount of points with a certain amount of minutes and seconds to play. Based on this calculation, this algorithm that I use, it says once a game hits that point, I'm going to throw all the stats after that point on the trash sheet, because you might have a team that's winning by, I don't know if it's going to be a 25-point lead with 4.5 to play. At that point, if it goes analytically final, what happens if that leading team all of a sudden puts its scrubs in, the lead dwindles down to 8 in the last 4.5 minutes? That's not truly indicative of the team that was up 25. That's the team I want to focus on.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I do. I think that makes my stuff kind of unique. I don't know if I was the first to do it, but I was probably one of the first to do it, to kind of throw out the garbage time stats. But that kind of sets me apart too from other people out there.
Is there any other factor like that you consider that you don't think is very common, that you really think differentiates what you do?
As far as a factor, you mean like a particular metric, maybe?
Yeah, like you have the analytically final, and like you said,
Yeah.
not too many people, if anybody, is really using something like that. Is there another element that you've integrated into Haslametrics that's not very common, as far as you know?
Well, I think some of them, I would say that a couple of my metrics out there, and one of the things I measure is consistency. Another one I measure is momentum, and momentum. I'm finding out doing a few studies that it's not necessarily predictive, but it'll still tell you how a team has done over its last 6 to 10 games. I think I can't remember if it's 4 to 8. I think it's actually 4 to 8 games. I think I changed it because it used to be 6 to 10. And then I said, I want something a little bit more recent. I want to get a better feeling of how they're doing right now. And so I cut it back to basically an average of 6 games. And that's what momentum is. Consistency is another one. And there's another one called AFH, which is away from home, which just kind of gives you an idea of how a team performs on a neutral court or on an away court. I guess you could flip around and call the metric like home court advantage. It would be the exact opposite. It would just be flipping the sign. But I called it AFH because I wanted to get an idea of how good a team was away from home.
Well, you've hit on 3 that I'm actually going to bring up as we go through this, because the 3 of them jump out at me. Is very interesting.
Yeah.
So let's get into the Gales and the MAC a little bit here. Earlier in the episode, I ran through some final KenPom numbers. So now that we look at them versus Haslametrics, we can understand there's some differences, and we can understand why. And we can also talk about some other program from the MAC named St. Peter's a little bit later on as well. But first, overall rank, the 2 were, you had Iona 97th when it was all said and done, KenPom 89th. Not really major difference there, but I will guess here that the momentum factor that you include played a difference here, because Iona finished the season 6-5, including 6-4 versus MAC teams. And Iona finished 248th nationally in momentum in Haslametrics. So I would say that's probably the biggest reason for that difference, right?
I believe that's a fair statement. And like I said, there's more to it behind the scenes, because the way he does his numbers is a little bit different than mine. You do occasionally see some teams out there where I may have a team at, say, 31, and Pomeroy will have it at like 59. It'll be way off. But Iona is definitely not one of those teams. And it does make sense. Like you said, I do believe that I really want, because I'm looking for a true predictive gauge. And I think what Ken does is, I think he probably includes things a little bit further back, weights things that are a little bit older, whereas I'm a little bit more aggressive. Everything that I have burns off at a rate of 1.5% per day. So I think something like a game that occurred like 40 days ago has roughly half the weight of a game that occurred yesterday. So yes, that would make sense, but it probably doesn't speak to the whole thing, because like I said, he's doing things his own way. I'm doing it my way. Most of the time they very closely overlap, especially at the end of the year, but it doesn't explain everything across the board.
Yeah. And offensive efficiency, 81st in Haslametrics, 80th in KenPom, pretty much same. Defensive, 112th Haslametrics, 105 KenPom, pretty similar there as well. The one thing we can agree on this year is Iona was remarkably consistent. Even with the losses down the stretch, Iona was 16th on Haslametrics for consistency rating, which means they were easier to predict than most of the rest of the country. Is that what you would say that means?
Yeah, there's 2 ways to look at consistency, and there's you could look at just the results, or you could look at the overall efficiency. And I'll give you a great example. Say Iona's, and I'll create a weird scenario, but it'll prove its point. Say Iona was supposed to win a game 55-45, and they ended up winning the game 95-85. The margin of victory is still the same, but the efficiency on both the offensive and defensive end are way, way off the mark. That's what consistency is going to look at there. It's going to look at the both individual efficiencies. It's not going to look at the final margin of victory. So in that situation, if they were supposed to win 55-45 and they won 95-85, they would be wildly inconsistent in that particular performance. So when you look at it, yes, that just means that a lot of what Iona did this year was very close to the mark. There wasn't a lot of variance there, not like a team like Iowa or North Carolina. Before the NCAA tournament, North Carolina was ridiculous. And some of its results, you could see that they had huge losses to good teams, and they even lost a home game to Pitt. And then at other times, there was one time I think they were up like 38 at the half against Florida State or something like that. Just really wildly all over the board. Iona was the opposite of that. Like I said, 16th in consistency. So they were very close to the mark throughout the year.
And another number you brought up that I want to come back to is Iona's away from home rating. 276 nationally. To be clear for everyone, that's not just road games where Iona definitely did not perform well. That also includes neutral site games. Now, this is going to sound confusing for Iona fans. I might need you to take a minute to explain, because Iona actually was, mostly speaking, pretty darn good in neutral site games this year. They beat Alabama, Yale, Delaware, Liberty, North Alabama, lost a close game to Kansas, lost to Belmont, and the game against Ryder in the MAC tournament. So I'd love to see what Iona's rating was in true road games if they were 276, if that includes the neutral site games. Can you explain a little bit of that for us?
Yeah, and it's really kind of hard to say, because you'll have to look at everything behind the scenes, and it depends on you. And sometimes they have wins and you go, well, that was a win. It was a bad win. You can have bad wins and you can have good losses. That's the great thing about the rating system, is there are times, if you look on my site, click on any team, and under best and worst performances, you'll sometimes see wins under the worst performances and losses under the best performances. It can happen. But if you look at what, especially with Iona, their best 3 performances this year were at home. Their worst 2 were away from home. What was kind of interesting, when I was looking at this, is, and you see this every so often, but just kind of an interesting factoid, Iona's best performance of the year and its worst performance of the year was against the same team. It was Siena, and they had a 17-point home win against Siena, a 6-point road loss at Siena. That was their worst of the year. So just kind of one of those weird things. It's just kind of how it shakes out. And when you're 276th, you don't know if there's a big gap between you and, say, 220th. I mean, you could have one game and you jump up 50 spots. It depends on how closely those teams are packed in that metric.
Yeah. And it's almost like we didn't script this, everybody, but I was going there next with the analytical performances. It's one of the really cool features of the site in my mind. And so it has your 5 best and your 5 worst performances of the year right there, as well as your last 5, and then your efficiency by month, all right on your team's page. So Iona's top 5 efficiency games were 3 home wins versus Siena, Fairfield, and Ryder, the neutral site win over North Alabama, and timely, the win at St. Peter's. Amazing that the Alabama game, which was, of course, the game everybody's going to remember the most from Iona this year, didn't crack the top 5. Or is it not so crazy in your mind?
Well, and I looked it up, and that game was actually their 9th best performance from an analytical standpoint. Here's the thing about Alabama, and I'll say it flat out right. Alabama just wasn't that great of a team. At the end of the year, they were 19-14 to finish the year. They were 42nd in my analytics. So this is a team that really did not deliver. I mean, everybody thinks of Alabama, and their first thought was that was the team that beat Gonzaga. But they really failed to deliver, especially down the stretch. If you looked at my site and do a neutral court prediction for Alabama and Iona, Alabama's only favored by less than 5.5 points. That's not a real huge gap. So that particular game outcome was not really out of left field. It was a positive performance for Iona. But based on the results, there's always an expectation based on any team you face. If Iona's going to play the worst team out there, which was, I think, Pewee, Iona, the expectation is on a neutral court, Iona is going to beat them by about 20. And if they go out there and all of a sudden they're up 60 at the half, that's going to be that performance is going to be through the roof. That's probably going to be their number 1 performance of the year. So that's the thing about it. It's not always about the team you play. It's how you perform versus the expectation. And that's how you get that rating system behind the scenes.
Okay. And some of the worst performances, since we're there, we might as well just go there too. 4 of the 6, the worst 5 were at Siena, at Niagara, home versus Harvard, home versus Marist, at Manhattan. People are probably wondering where the Trinity loss to Ryder was. Looks like it was 6th, or at least right around there. So that would mean 4 of our 6 worst performances of the year came in February and March. So not, I guess, a shock for Iona fans, because the Gales just simply were not as good once we got to February. I said, and before we leave this section here, I want to talk about that average efficiency by month. I said during Iona's late season struggles that the team peaked in December. Haslametrics ratings backed that up to a T. The number was tremendous in December, but you look at that number but you get to February, March, and it's just, ew, oh boy. So there's no question, Eric, we truly have a situation here where a team's story is reflected by your analytics. This has to make you feel good about this product that you've developed, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I want to do. I mean, when it comes to it, I still support the eye test. I still support people putting their eyes actually watching the games, trying to identify things that you can see, because obviously weird things happen, and sometimes your eyes catch things that the analytics cannot. Injuries being a big part of it. That's one thing that I think a lot of people with analytics, unless you're breaking things down to the player level, which I do not do, and most people I don't think do that. It's real. First of all, it's really difficult to do that because a lot of the time you have to make a lot of assumptions. I tried this years ago, and there are just certain guys who just play about 35, 36 minutes per game, and the sample set of minutes of a player like that sitting the bench, how the team performs without him, it's not a big sample size, so it's really tough to make a comparison between a team with a guy who's on the court and a guy who's not off the court or not on the court when that guy plays 36 minutes a game. So it's tricky to do that. So I keep things at a team level. And that's why I always say, I think to a certain degree, you still got to put your eyes on the game, watch the game, try to find tendencies of all these different teams. And I also listen to other people who out there probably watch the games more than I do. And I rely on their input as well. So I always say that analytics is like evidence at a crime scene. It's very valuable, can be used in a court of law, but at the end of the day, you still need the judge, you still need the jury, and that's where the eye test comes in.
Well, I cannot let you leave here without getting your take on what St. Peter's accomplished last month. We don't have to dive into the numbers too much, but I would think you'd agree that this is a case where just no analytic was going to see this coming. As you're watching St. Peter's, the whole St. Peter's NCAA run unfold, as somebody like yourself with a very logical, data-oriented mind, what were you thinking?
I was thinking this makes no sense whatsoever. It's right up there with UMBC beating Virginia that one year. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason why that should ever happen. And when you look at this, I can't explain it. This is a team that lost to St. Francis by double digits at one point in the year. There was not a single, if I'm not mistaken here, there was not a single top 100 win before the NCAA tournament. I think their best win, if I'm not mistaken, was Monmouth, who was number 162 in my rankings. There was nothing before that. There was no inkling that they were going to go out there and be able to beat Kentucky, beat Purdue, and I mean, throw in Murray State as well. It's just nothing that could have prepared you for it. Here's the thing about it, though. I think they finished the year for me 101st. There are a lot of people that are putting them in the top 25 in their polls at the end. I'm kind of rolling my eyes at that. I think you still have to take into account the entire body of work. And I know recency bias is a big thing in college basketball. Just look at UCLA after last year when they took Gonzaga to the wire. Everybody all of a sudden loved UCLA when this was a Bruins team that was trailing at the half in a play-in game to Michigan State last year and then barely won that game. Right. So it's always about recency bias. So a lot of people, I'm not surprised that some people are going to put St. Peter's there at the end, but incredible run. You got to give them credit, but nobody saw it coming. I mean, it's one thing beating Kentucky, which is out of left field, but then following it up with a win over Murray State and then beating Purdue, man, it's March does some crazy stuff. That's why they call it March Madness.
And it's just, again, we know how important analytics are becoming in college hoops. And then you have something that completely defies all logic like that, where you have to just kind of sit in awe and enjoy it. And you just realize that no matter how you crunch numbers, you're not going to see something like that happen. It's just amazing.
Exactly. And that's what makes the tournament so unpredictable. And that's why everybody every year, they're always like, who's going to be in the Final Four? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Come on. Anything can happen. It's just, It's just insane. So, I mean, that's big part of why people love it so much.
Yeah. Well, I hope all our listeners learned a bit more about analytics and their importance in this episode. And Erik, we really appreciate you coming on to educate us further. I know I found it fascinating and educational, and I'm hoping everybody listening did as well. Everyone should be checking out the Haslametrics website. It's free, which is unlike the other site out there that people might go visit. And you can also follow Erik on Twitter at Haslametrics. He's an entertaining follow for all hoop heads for sure. And again, I started to catch on to you because of what you said. I always started to see that hashtag analytically final, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? So now we all know, everybody knows. I did figure it out as we went along, but now everybody knows. So it's always fun to, and people are checking in with you as games are on throughout the country. Yeah. Is that final yet? Is that analytically final yet?
Yeah, they love it. For whatever reason that caught on. They love that part of it. So
everybody needs a slogan. See?
There you go.
So
Or
thank
John,
you.
yeah, John Rothstein has about 76 of them. I have one. So I got 75 to go.
Well, it's all right. Hey, it's okay. Well, anyway, I thank you again for coming on and educating us. I know you go into you go into hibernation during your off season a bit. I try to, but it doesn't seem to ever work out. So enjoy your off season, and we'll fire everything back up in November.
Thank you. Have a great one.
All right, take care. Thanks again to Erik Haslam for joining us this episode. Always helps to understand the analytics as they are a growing part of college hoops. Let's hope some of those Iona numbers are even better in 2022-23. As always, go Gales.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the IonaHoops.com podcast. This podcast is a production of IonaHoops.com and its publisher Guy Filatico. The opinions shared during this podcast are those of Guy Filatico, IonaHoops.com, and any featured guests. This podcast is not affiliated with Iona College Athletics or the college itself. Thank you for supporting IonaHoops.com.